Erev Tov, everybody. Good evening. This week's Parsha, of course, is Parsha Chayei. That's what we're going to be reading on Shabbat. I want to tell everybody that Emir Tashem, in addition to our lesson tonight, this will be found again at Shabbat morning at 8:30. So in case anybody asks, we will get back to our regular Wednesday evening, Shabbat morning schedule for Shiurim. Parashat Chayei Sarah has within it a certain, I guess we'd have to say that, there's a certain irony. It's called Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, but really it talks about the death of Sarah. Not only does it talk about the death of Sarah, it also later on in the Parsha, talks about the death of Avraham Avinu as well. So both of our founding ancestors pass away. Their passing is recorded in this parsha, but we're not going to focus on that. The parsha itself, I like to call it the parsha of Hashkacha, God's providential care in a macro way, in a universal way, is evident in this parsha. How so? Well, it begins with Sarah's passing in Hebron, Kiryat Arba. Today, they're two separate communities, but they're linked. Avram Avinu comes. We don't know exactly from where, but the speculation of Abravanel is he came from Be'er Sheva. Be'er Sheva was, let us say, Avram Avinu's base of operations. He comes, he mourns her, he purchases the land from Ephron Achiti with the burial cave that we now call the Marat HaMachpelah, the double cave, the cave of the couples is really what it is. And the first of our matriarchs is then buried there. Shortly afterwards, Avram calls to his Eved, to his primary servant, who is never identified formally by name. We have a tradition that the Eved really was Eliezer, but Eliezer's name is not mentioned anywhere in the parsha. He is just Ha'eved, Ha'eved, Ha'eved. We have good reason to believe. Of course, first of all, we always have good reason to believe what Chazal tells us. That's the first thing. But Chazal have a very strong contextual basis, because in the parsha, a couple of parshiot back, Eliezer is called Zakan Beito. He's called the person who's in charge of all of the household of Avram and all of his holdings. So it would make sense that Eliezer was mentioned both in Parshat Lech Lecha, and mentioned, although not mentioned here, he is the Zakan Beito, the elder of the house, or the primary director, that it would be Eliezer. He goes, and notice we now have Be'er Sheva, where Avram came from, Hebron, where Sarah Imenu passes away, then she's buried. Then Avram sends Eliezer to a place called Aram Naharaim, to where his family is. Now, Aram Naharaim is pretty much near Syria, or in Syria, modern day Syria, although, of course, that country per se did not exist then as it does now. No countries do or did. But we call it Mesopotamia. Now, Meso means between. Potamos is Latin for river, between the two rivers, the Tigris, Euphrates, the Fertile Crescent, as we call it as well. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Arabic name, Al Jazeera, which is the name of course, their news authority, Al Jazeera. Jazeera is like the Hebrew word gezerah, ligzor, which means the place of the separation between the two rivers. So, which probably is Mesopotamia. But in either case, Eliezer goes literally on a blind journey to find a blind date. This is not so easy. And so he asks, and I'm going to call him Eliezer. He asks Hashem to guide him, to find the right person. And Eliezer sets the parameters. Not just I'm closing my eyes and pointing, but the person who's coming has to demonstrate certain character traits, offering water to him, to his camels, etc. And then, of course, comes Rivka. Now, Rivka, Chazal say that she was 3 years old. I'd like to point out that could she have been 3 years old? Sure, she could have been 3 years old. Anything could be. And they determine it through various different psukim, but not everybody agrees that she was 3 years old. But she was, because she certainly did quite a workload, as we will see, even for a grown adult, let alone a child. Now, that doesn't mean we dismiss what Chazal say. It means we have to understand it. We're not going to spend that much time on it now because my agenda is a little bit different, with your permission. Now, she takes and fills not only the water for him, but the water for the camels. Now, Nechama Leibovitz once asked us, how many times did Rivka go to the well? It doesn't say in the Torah how many times she went to the well. So she said to us, so remember, this is 1986. It wasn't so easy just to go to Google and find out how much a camel would drink after it traverses the desert. But what she did, because she was so curious and so dedicated to truth, she went then to one of her friends who was the chairman of the zoology department in, I believe it was Hebrew College, Hebrew University at the time. And she asked, how much does a camel drink? Well, a camel drinks 60 liters, 60 liters when it's, let's say, completely famished for water, 60 liters. And how many camels did Eliezer bring? 10. So that's 600 liters. But she wasn't done. Nechama then went to the head of the archaeology department at Hebrew University and said, well, how much water would a flask in those days hold? She'd have to go to the well and dig it up. So the flask, the answer she got was the flask of those days on average held 1.5 liters of water. Okay, or liquid, but it's always water going to be. So if you divide 600, right, 60 times 10, right? And by the way, Nechama Leibovitz said, "Teta'er la'atzmechem." Just imagine this: 300 2-liter bottles. That's how she put it in class. Just picture 300 2-liter bottles, and that's not even going to a well. Can you picture them even in a room to make that many trips? So now, how many trips did she make? The flask held 1.5 liters. She went to the well 400 times. And in Nechama's inimitable way, she said, for a person whom she didn't know, and for all she knew, would never see him or his camels again. So she said, so the next time you're standing in downtown Yerushalayim and somebody says, Slicha, Eifo Rehov Yafo, how do I get to Rehov Yafo? And you just point and say, Yashar, Yashar, over there. She said, don't consider yourself a child of Rivka Imeh. What a beautiful shir it was. I remember it today like I heard it, as I heard it 33 years ago. I remember it, or 34 years ago. I remember it because I could see the depth, not only of her intellect and her curiosity, but also I could see how kind she was. That she said, you have to have a lesson from this, what to do. So good. And she said, by the way, when she was going, she said, by the way, when Eliezer was going back and forth, what was what was, I'm sorry, when Rivka was going back and forth 400 times, what was Eliezer doing? She folded her arms like this and said, just watched her. Okay. So the shear stayed in my mind. We'll come back to this shear a little bit later. She goes and she, Rivka Imenu goes back to the house with her family, with Eliezer. Eliezer gives the gifts, and Rivka consents to go back to Eretz Canaan, to people whom she does not know, to a chatan, to a husband that she's never met. Now, that in itself, of course, is a remarkable element. And then the Torah tells us, as they approach Eretz Yisrael, the Torah tells us where Yitzchak was located. The pasuk says, "V'Yitzchak ba mibo be'er lachai ro'i." Yitzchak was coming mibo, from coming to the place called be'er lachai ro'i. So we add now yet another location to this magnificent story. It starts in Hebron. Be'er Sheva comes into play. We go to Aram Naharaim, to Mesopotamia, and now there's this place called Be'er Lachai Ro'i. And the other places are fairly famous, but Be'er Lachai Ro'i seems to be obscure. What is its importance? Well, we know that the importance is back when Hagar was banished from the house, from Sarah Imenu, and there was, in fact, discord. Avram Avinu did not want to send the boy or Hagar out. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, whatever Sarah says to you, Shema B'kola, listen to what she says. By the way, I'm not saying that she was wrong, but remember, sometimes people are right but for the wrong reason too. That's possible. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows whether one is right for the right reason or right for the wrong reason. But in any case, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Avram, despite your misgivings, send them out. And indeed, that's what occurs. And the Torah tells us that, of course, she cried. She actually left her own son because she couldn't bear to see him die. But then the Malach comes. The Malach comes and says, he's not going to die. He's going to become a great nation. He's going to grow into a para Adam. He's going to grow into a wild individual, one that's uncontrollable, but he's yours and he will live. Okay. Now, so what is Yitzchak doing going to Be'er Lachai Ro'i? What is he doing there? And not only that, the phrasing of the pasuk is the Yitzchak ba mibo, meaning to say he came from his coming to Be'er Lachai Ro'i, which means that he had been there before. Some people in Chazal say he went often to that place. Now, I once heard from Rabbi Yechiel Pupko, whom I admire very much for his erudition. I believe he's the cultural spiritual leader at Federation still. He said, here's what he told me. He said, Be'er Lachai Ro'i is the place that reminded Yitzchak of the only discord that ever occurred between his father and his mother. His mother wanted them out. His father disagreed. And the pasuk is very clear that they had a sharp interaction between them. So Rabbi Pupko said, Yitzchak is about to get married. His bride will be coming soon. He didn't want. He actually prayed daily at that location that there not be discord in his family. By the way, his prayer was mostly answered, but it wasn't completely answered, as we know. We'll see that when we get into other parshiot. But what does the phrase Be'er Lachai Ro'i mean? What does it mean? Be'er Lachai Ro'i means Be'er, the well, that's where she was. And by the way, Be'er Lachai Ro'i, we don't know exactly where it is. There is speculation in various different places where it is. One of them, the Dak Mikra, seems to place it in the Sinai desert. Okay, not necessarily deep into it, but in the Sinai desert. That's a little hard to understand because Yitzchak was not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. Chazal tell us he was a korban. Once he became a korban doesn't leave Eretz Yisrael. So that's a little harder to understand. But we don't know the exact location of Be'er Lachai Ro'i. But it means the well, Lachai Ro'i, of the living God who sees me. Be'er, the well, Lachai, of the living God, Ro'i, who sees me. That happens to be the name that Hagar named the well. Very apt, very powerful name. So now we're going to talk a little bit about why Yitzchak was there. One we said was because his new bride is coming, and he wanted, I guess it was etched in his mind that his two parents, who undoubtedly were the paragons of virtue in his life, he did see some discord, and that must have traumatized him to some degree. That at least is the theory of Rabbi Pupko. It certainly has its basis. So he went there, praying that it does not happen to him ever. The second view is that he went to go planting. The Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, who was known as the great Pashtan. He was known as the great contextual interpreter, meaning to say, look at the context, don't go beyond that. He went there probably to plant. He owned land, and he went to till there. That's a possibility. The Ktav Kabbalah, a great Torah scholar of the 19th century, Yaakov Mecklenburg, he speculates that he went lasuach basadeh. So lasuach, he said, really, the sin and the samach are interchangeable in lasuach, and they have two different meanings. Lasuach could mean, if it's with a samach, means to be distracted. It means to be distracted. Now, what does that mean? When do we seek distraction? Let's say when we're, and the definition of that distraction is usually to engage in activities not related to the principal idea that you're working on. Maybe it's work, it could be raising a family, whatever it is. Distractions are activities that we engage in to take our minds away from the principal thing that we're doing. And so, the Ktav Kabbalah said that Yitzchak went not for any particular powerful reason, but to distract himself. You know, she's coming. He doesn't know what she looks like. He doesn't know what her character is. He doesn't even know whether Eliezer is going to complete his mission. Excuse me. He doesn't even know if Eliezer is going to complete the mission. So he distracts himself. Where does he go? He goes to Be'er Lachai Ro'i. However, Chazal tell us the word lasuach we find here and in other places. The word sicha could mean simple, mundane conversation, or it could mean prayer. Rashi believes that's the case here, that he went to daven there. So does Onkelos, two very powerful minds. They each feel that he was there to daven. This was a way that he could get the solitude that he needed. It wasn't in a major area, but it was in the desert. And I can personally tell you, if you've ever been in the desert is a wonderful place to contemplate. It is an absolutely wonderful place. It's like you don't hear any sounds when you're in the desert. There's silence there. You might hear, I guess, wind somehow rustling through whatever small vegetation is there. But I remember once I took a tour of a place in the Negev, and the tour guide, there were about 20 of us, he just kept walking, and I wanted to know what this bush is, and I want to know what this tree is, and what do we call this land formation, none of that. He stops in one place and he says, the desert, he said, I could tell you all these things. You're going to forget what they are anyway. He said, what I'm telling you is I'm bringing you to this place so that you can concentrate your thoughts on anything that you want. I'm going to ask you to walk several steps from each other, one at a time. Maybe there weren't 20, maybe there were 12 of us, something like that. And he says, and then go find a place and think about something that's important to you. I've got to tell you, it was wonderful. I walked out and I sat over this gorge and no sound, just the beautiful silence of the desert. And I was able to work out a problem that I had right there. So the desert, it could be that that's exactly what Yitzchak was doing when he went to Be'er Lachai Roi. Now it's true, Be'er Lachai Roi undoubtedly, was had water there, but not external, just under the ground, and but it was largely desert. So that is what he may have done. Finally, so the Chazal tell us he went there to daven mincha. Chazal tell us that Avraham is associated with the creation and the formalizing of Shacharit, not necessarily all the words, but the formalizing of Shacharit. And Yitzchak here is intimated as having mincha, and because it was toward evening, and Yaakov was the evening, Vayifka b'makom. Yaakov, the evening Ma'ariv prayer. Very good. So now the pasuk says to us two psukim that are very strange. Vayisa Yitzchak et einav vayar et hagamalim. There's Yitzchak, David mincha, or he planted, or he raised his hands in prayer. By the way, Rav Menachem B. Sachs, the great Torah scholar that we had the privilege in our community of having him and founding so much, Rabbi Sachs said, when he wrote, he said, who says that they're mutually exclusive? Rivka saw Yitzchak, and she saw his hands. Either his hands were in prayer, spiritual, or his hands were planting. Could be both. She saw that. And as a matter of fact, he said, from here we can say those people who think that Yitzchak retired from anything in this world probably are mistaken. When we see that from here and also from Parshat Toldot, that Yitzchak was involved in material works. And the Torah tells us he was very successful at what he did. Very, very successful. So some people say, well, he was lonely and he was alone and he was, but I don't think that was necessarily his personality. It certainly wasn't the same as Avraham Avinu, but his personality was both spiritual and he had an attachment to the ground. Now, he lifted his eyes, it says, Vayisa Yitzchak et einav vayar et hagamalim. He saw the camels. So, big deal. But two people can look at the same object. One person sees nothing of any significance. Camels are camels. Even though he knew that Eliezer was coming, and they certainly could have been his camels. But to certain people, things are very significant. To him, the camels were a symbol of God's hashgacha, of Hashem's providential care, that in fact what he had hoped would come about did come about. And so, Vayisa Yitzchak et einav. Now, one verse later, the Torah says, Vatisa Rivka et eineha vatere et Yitzchak. Same phrase, only in the feminine form. Same phrase. And what does it happen? And what happens? She lifted her eyes and she saw not the tools of God's providential care, let's say camels. She knew what the camels were. She saw the end, the objective of God's providential care. Vatera et Yitzchak. Where else do we have the phrase, Vayisa einav vayar? He lifted his eyes and he saw at the Akedah. After the Malach stopped Avraham Avinu from consummating this, the sacrifice of Yitzchak, Avraham Avinu immediately looked up. Not Vayisa et einav. When you find that, it almost always means they were looking for something. It's not that they saw it. They were looking for something. Avram was looking for something in the place of Yitzchak. Yitzchak, many years later here, is looking for something. Yitzchak is looking and sees the tools, the instruments of God's providential care. They were camels to everybody else. To him, they were tools and they were instruments of Hashem. And Rivka, being the tzadeket that she was, looked up and she saw, Vatisa et einah vateire, she saw Yitzchak, and Yitzchak was not the instrument of God's care, but he was in fact the object, which is exactly what she was looking for. So that phrase, Vayisa Vatisa, is very important. Now, I want to tell you, as I guess used to be, forgot his name, but he was a newscaster, and he used to say, here's the rest of the story, just coming to mind. If we were in one room, you'd all be telling me probably. But anyway, here's the rest of the story with Nechama. Remember I told you? I was sitting in shir with her. I got this beautiful shir from her. She said to us, remember, she started by saying, how many times is Eliezer mentioned in the Parsha? So it's either 100 or none, right? Because otherwise, what's the sense of asking, all right? So it was none. Eliezer is never mentioned by name. By the way, the newscaster was Paul Harvey. So anyway, so that was one. She said, number two, did you ever think of what it took her to do to go to the well for this person that she never met, and camels and the person they'll never see again? And so she did. She did the legwork to find out that camels drink 60 liters. That would be 600 liters. And that a flask held 1.5 liters. That would be 400 times to the well for this person, this stranger. And by the way, to us, Hachnasat Orchim is extremely important. I'm not saying you have to go to the well 600 times, but this is one of the ways that we can see what a Jewish value this is. Now, if you recall, she said, now next time someone asks you, excuse me, can you tell me where Rehov Yafo is? You know where it is, and you just say, that way, that way. She said, don't count yourself among the children of Rivka, Imei. Nice. That was Sunday. Tuesday, one of my children, we were all in Eretz Yisrael for a year. Tuesday, one of our children had to have 2 teeth pulled. Okay, and strange city. So we had only been there maybe a couple of months, and so she went. She had 1 or 2 teeth pulled. So she's there with her bloated cheek, and I'm standing. I didn't have a car, so we would go by bus. We're standing at a bus stop in Jerusalem, as is often the case. Great people walk by. And people all over. I saw a philosopher that I knew was at Hebrew University. Up walks Nechama Leibowitz. Oh, very good. And by that time, we had, we were familiar with each other. She was very nice. So she looks immediately and she sees my daughter, and she says, what happened? And I told her that she had her teeth extracted. So, oh, that's terrible. I had it extracted, I remember, and it hurts. Wished her refuah shlema. Again, a person she doesn't really know, but someone who will never forget what happened. Fine. We're waiting for a bus. Okay. Now, I have to make this brief, but there are times, I think, when parents think that they're super parents. So when I was there, I wanted to make sure that my daughter knew every single street, why it was named and what the intersection was. You can imagine she woke up that morning saying, I can't wait to hear this. All right. So I told her this street is the main street, that's the Ramban street, and this intersects, that's the Ramban student, and his name, that's why it's called Rashba. Well, of course, she's in misery, which I had ignored. Along comes the bus. Bus stops and opens up, and it's not our bus. It's not Nechama's bus, it's not my bus. But the door opens, and there's an old lady, must have been easily in her 80s. And if you remember, in Eretz Yisrael, they didn't even, this is even before the days of the nylon sacks, which they call nylons. It was, you would take like a basket for a clothing basket, and you would carry it. So she had one of these filled in both hands, and she's clearly bent over, difficult. The bus is open, and I'm thinking to myself, how's she going to get off that bus? Before the brain kicked in and said, why don't you go help her? Nechama Leibovitz, who at that time was 81 years old, went up the stairs, took one of the baskets, put her arm around the woman, and walked her down to the street, leaving Superfather to realize how foolish a person can be. Sunday, she said, so the next time you see someone who needs your help, don't just say it's somewhere over there. If you ask me that year, you can see 33 years later, I can give you almost verbatim what she told me, but it didn't sink in. And that's the difference between great people like Nechama Leibovitz and many of the rest of us. I learned the Torah. I'm telling you what she told me. I can give you the shir that she gave me. She lived the Torah. That's what we need to remember from here. All of this Torah leads up to so much, but let's do our best to live the Torah, not just learn it, to make it a part of our life. And when we do so, we will be the children of Rivka. So we'll see you next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, and again there will be a Shabbat shir 8:30 this coming Shabbat. So wish everybody Shabbat Shalom, all the best. Bye bye.
Yeshua, Shalom, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Dorothy? Okay. All right, everyone. All the best.
Thank you.